The morning sun barely penetrated the thick canopy of cloud forest surrounding Machu Picchu as Kathleen Morrison adjusted the straps of her weathered backpack. February in the Peruvian Andes meant unpredictable weather. Brilliant sunshine one moment, torrential rain the next. At 25, she had dreamed of this moment since her freshman year at Boston University, where she'd fallen in love with pre-Columbian archaeology during a single lecture about the Inca Empire. "You ready for this, Kath?" Jessica Chen, her roommate and travel companion, appeared beside her with 2 steaming cups of coca tea from their hostel in Aguas Calientes. The small town nestled in the valley below the ancient citadel hummed with the morning energy of guides, porters, and tourists preparing for the day's ascent. Kathleen wrapped her cold fingers around the ceramic mug, inhaling the earthy aroma. "I've been ready for 4 years. This is literally why I chose archaeology as my major." Their group of 8 travelers, a mix of American college students and a retired Canadian couple, gathered near the hostel entrance where their guide, Marco Quispe, reviewed the day's itinerary. He was a compact man in his 40s, with weathered skin and eyes that constantly scanned the mountains as if reading secrets in the stone. "Today we take the alternative trail," Marco announced in accented English, pointing to a hand-drawn map. "More difficult than the tourist buses, yes, but you see the real Machu Picchu. The terraces, the agricultural zones, the water temples the big groups never visit." Kathleen felt her pulse quicken. This was exactly what she wanted. Not the sanitized tourist experience, but the authentic archaeological landscape. She pulled out her Nikon camera, checking the film advance one more time. Digital cameras were becoming more common, but she preferred the deliberate nature of film photography, especially for her research documentation. The group began their ascent at 7:15 in the morning. The trail was narrow, carved into the mountainside centuries ago by Inca engineers. On one side, moss-covered stone walls rose vertically. On the other, the ground dropped away into a green abyss of vegetation and morning mist. The sound of the Urubamba River echoed from somewhere far below. "Stay together," Marco called out as they climbed. "These paths, they look simple, but many branches go to old farming terraces, abandoned villages. Very easy to get confused." Kathleen walked near the middle of the group, her camera swinging from her neck. Every few minutes she stopped to photograph details. The precise stonework of a retaining wall, the way ancient drainage channels still functioned after 500 years, the play of light through the clouds on the distant peaks. By 9 o'clock they reached a spectacular viewpoint where 3 agricultural terraces descended like giant stairs into the valley. While the others rested and shared trail mix, Kathleen noticed something unusual. A partially collapsed stone structure about 50 yards off the main trail, hidden behind a curtain of overhanging ferns. "Marco," she called out, pointing. "What's that building?" The guide squinted in that direction, then shrugged. "Old storage house, maybe. Many small structures like this all around the mountain. The Incas built everywhere." Kathleen's academic instincts tingled. She had studied enough site surveys to know that auxiliary structures often revealed as much about Inca society as the famous temples and palaces. "I want to take some photographs. Just give me 5 minutes." Jessica frowned. "We're not supposed to leave the trail. It's right there, I can see the path from here." Kathleen was already moving toward the structure, her camera in hand. "I'll catch up in 5 minutes, promise." Marco hesitated, consulting his watch. 5 minutes only. We have a schedule." Kathleen picked her way carefully down a faint side trail, her hiking boots finding purchase on the uneven stone steps. The structure proved even more interesting up close. A 2-story building with intact walls and the distinctive trapezoidal doorways characteristic of Inca architecture. Vines had claimed most of the exterior, but inside, she could see niches carved into the walls, probably for storing ceramics or ceremonial objects. She spent several minutes photographing from different angles, noting the construction techniques, the way the building was positioned to catch morning light. This was exactly the kind of primary research that would distinguish her senior thesis. When she emerged from the structure and looked back toward the main trail, her group had vanished. Kathleen felt a flutter of concern but pushed it aside. They had obviously moved on, probably just around the next bend in the trail. She climbed back up to where they had been resting, recognizing the spot by a distinctive boulder shaped like a condor's head. But when she reached the main trail, she faced an unexpected problem. The path split in 3 directions, one continuing up the mountain, one traversing horizontally along the slope, and one descending toward what looked like another terrace complex. She tried to remember which way Marco had been pointing before she left. But she had been so focused on the structure that she hadn't paid attention. No problem, she told herself. The main route to Machu Picchu goes up. Everyone knows that. Kathleen chose the ascending path and walked briskly, expecting to see her group just ahead. Her watch showed 9:20. She had been gone maybe 10 minutes, not even the full 5 she had promised. After 15 minutes of steady climbing, doubt crept in. The trail had become narrower, less maintained. Grass grew between the stones in places, and fallen branches partially blocked the way. This didn't look like a route that saw regular traffic. She stopped at a small clearing and called out, "Marco! Jessica!" Her voice echoed off the mountain face and disappeared into the vegetation. Silence answered her. Even the bird sounds seemed to have faded. Kathleen pulled out the small trail map from her backpack, a photocopied handout Marco had given them the previous evening. But the map was hopelessly general, showing only the major routes and landmarks. The web of smaller trails crisscrossing the mountainside weren't marked at all. Okay, she thought, forcing herself to stay calm. Option 1. Go back to where the trail split and try one of the other paths. Option 2. Continue up. Machu Picchu is at the top of the mountain, so eventually any upward trail should lead there. She chose option 2, reasoning that retracing her steps might only confuse her further. Besides, she could now hear voices ahead, faint but definitely human. Relief flooded through her as she hurried forward, but when she rounded the next bend, she found only a family of campesinos, local farmers, tending a small plot of coca plants on a narrow terrace. They looked surprised to see her. "Hola?" Kathleen said, her Spanish rudimentary but serviceable. "El camino a Machu Picchu?" The oldest man, wearing a traditional chulo hat with ear flaps, pointed upward, but also seemed to be warning her about something. His rapid Spanish mixed with Quechua words she didn't understand. He kept gesturing at the sky and making a downward motion with his hand. "Lluvia," the man said clearly. "Rain." Kathleen glanced up. The clouds had thickened considerably, turning from white to ominous gray. The temperature had dropped several degrees. "Gracias," she said, and continued climbing, faster now. She needed to reach her group before the rain started. The trail grew steeper, forcing her to use her hands on the larger steps. Her camera banged against her chest, and she tucked it inside her jacket to protect it. The vegetation changed character. Fewer ferns, more tough grass, and hardy shrubs adapted to higher altitude. At what she guessed was around 11,000 feet elevation, the trail simply ended at a collapsed retaining wall. Below stretched a dizzying drop into the cloud forest. Above, an almost vertical cliff face with no visible route. Kathleen's heart sank. This was definitely wrong. She turned back, walking faster now, anxiety building in her chest. When she reached the coca terraces again, the farmers had gone, probably seeking shelter from the approaching storm. The first fat raindrops began to fall, cold and heavy. She needed to make a decision: go back to the original split in the trail, or find shelter and wait for the weather to pass. Her watch showed 11:30. She had been separated from her group for over 2 hours. Kathleen chose to keep moving, hoping to recognize a landmark, but the rain intensified rapidly, turning into a proper Andean downpour that reduced visibility to barely 20 feet. The trail stones became slick and treacherous. She slipped twice, catching herself on overhanging branches. That's when she heard it, a sound like distant thunder, but wrong. It came from above and behind her, growing rapidly louder. Rockfall. Kathleen turned just in time to see a section of the trail collapse about 30 yards upslope, sending tons of mud and stone cascading down the mountainside. The debris flow was heading straight for her section of the path. She ran, her boots sliding on the wet stones, her breath coming in panicked gasps. Just ahead, she saw a narrow gap in the vegetation that might lead to more stable ground. Without thinking, she dove toward it as the first wave of mud and rock swept across the trail behind her. The gap turned out to be the edge of a steep barranco, a ravine that dropped sharply away from the trail. Kathleen tried to stop, but her momentum and the slick ground betrayed her. She tumbled over the edge, her body sliding and rolling through wet vegetation, branches tearing at her clothes and skin. She fell for what felt like minutes, but was probably only seconds before her left leg struck something solid with a crack that made her cry out. Then her head hit rock, and the gray world dissolved into darkness. Kathleen's eyes opened to complete disorientation. Everything hurt, a deep throbbing pain that seemed to radiate from her left leg upward through her entire body. Her head pounded with each heartbeat, and when she tried to move, nausea rolled through her stomach in waves. "Where am I?" She blinked, trying to focus. Above her, she could see a canopy of vegetation, ferns, moss-covered branches, and beyond them a slice of gray sky. Rain fell steadily, but she was partially sheltered by an overhang of rock and dense foliage. The sound of water was everywhere, dripping, flowing, rushing somewhere nearby. Memory came back in fragments. The trail, the split paths, the storm, the rockfall, and then falling, tumbling down the ravine through the wet vegetation. Kathleen tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Pain exploded in her left leg, so intense that black spots danced in her vision. She forced herself to breathe slowly, waiting for the agony to subside to a merely unbearable level. When she could think clearly again, she carefully assessed her situation. She was lying at the bottom of what appeared to be a steep ravine, perhaps 30 or 40 feet below the trail. Her backpack was still strapped to her shoulders, which seemed like a miracle. Her camera, however, was gone. The neck strap had broken during the fall. Her left leg was the obvious problem. Even through her rain-soaked hiking pants, she could see the unnatural angle below her knee. Not a compound fracture, thank God. The bone hadn't broken through the skin, but definitely broken. Possibly her fibula, possibly worse. She needed help. Now. "Help!" Kathleen shouted, her voice hoarse and weak. "Somebody help me. I'm down here." The rain absorbed her words, making them sound pathetically small. She tried again, louder this time, ignoring the way it made her head throb. "Marco, Jessica, anyone." Only the sound of falling rain answered her. Kathleen forced herself to think logically, the way her archaeology professors had taught her to approach field problems. First priority, assess injuries and immediate dangers. Second priority, secure shelter and water. Third priority, signal for rescue. Her leg was broken, that was clear. Her head wound was less obvious, but the dried blood she felt when she touched her temple, and the persistent dizziness suggested at least a mild concussion. Her left wrist throbbed, possibly sprained but still functional. Various cuts and bruises covered her arms and face, but nothing that seemed life-threatening. Immediate dangers. Hypothermia was the biggest concern. She was soaked through, and the temperature at this altitude, even in February, could drop dangerously at night. Infection was another worry, especially if her wounds weren't cleaned. And dehydration, ironically, despite being surrounded by rain, she needed clean water to drink. Kathleen managed to shrug off her backpack, gritting her teeth against the pain each movement caused. Inside, she found most of her supplies intact. A water bottle, 3 energy bars, a first aid kit, a fleece jacket, rain poncho, headlamp, and a small folding knife. Her cell phone was there too, but when she powered it on, the screen showed no signal. She was too deep in the mountains, too far from any tower. The shelter situation was partially solved. The rock overhang above her provided some protection from the rain, but she needed to address her leg before the swelling got worse. Using the knife, she carefully cut away the lower part of her pant leg to expose the injury. The break was about 3 inches above her ankle, and the swelling was already significant. She'd taken a wilderness first aid course before the trip, and she remembered the basics of splinting. Working slowly, stopping frequently when the pain became too intense, Kathleen gathered several straight sticks from the surrounding vegetation. She used her spare t-shirt from the backpack, torn into strips, to create padding, then positioned the sticks along both sides of her lower leg. The actual process of splinting made her cry out several times, but she forced herself to continue, securing the makeshift splint with strips of fabric and her belt. When she finished, she lay back against the rock face, exhausted and shaking. The splint was crude but functional. It would have to do. The rain continued throughout the afternoon. Kathleen drifted in and out of consciousness, unable to tell if she was sleeping or passing out from pain and shock. During the lucid moments, she tried to understand her situation. Marco and the group would have reached Machu Picchu by early afternoon. When she didn't appear, they would have raised the alarm. Search parties would be organized. That was standard procedure for missing tourists. But where would they search? She had no idea how far she had wandered from the main trail, or in which direction. The ravine where she lay was narrow and heavily vegetated. From above, even from the trail she had been on, she would be completely invisible. Search helicopters, if they used helicopters, would never spot her through the dense canopy. She tried shouting again as evening approached, but her voice was growing weaker. The effort exhausted her. As darkness fell, Kathleen retrieved her headlamp and turned it on, conserving the battery by using it only when necessary. The night sounds of the cloud forest emerged, Insects, night birds, the rustle of unseen animals in the undergrowth. Each sound made her tense with fear, imagining jaguars or venomous snakes, though her rational mind knew both were unlikely at this altitude. The cold was worse than the fear. Despite putting on her dry fleece and wrapping herself in the rain poncho, she shivered uncontrollably. Her wet hiking pants clung to her skin, leaching away body heat. She knew she was at serious risk of hypothermia, but there was nothing she could do about it. Starting a fire in these conditions with her limited supplies and broken leg was impossible. She ate one energy bar, rationing her supplies. The 3 bars and her water bottle, maybe 20 ounces, represented her entire food and water supply. She had no idea how long she might be here. The night passed in a haze of pain, cold, and fitful semi-consciousness. Several times Kathleen was certain she heard voices calling her name, only to realize it was the wind in the trees or the sound of flowing water. Once, she dreamed that Jessica had found her and was helping her climb back to the trail, but she woke to darkness and the crushing reality of her situation. Dawn came slowly, the darkness gradually giving way to gray light filtered through clouds and vegetation. The rain had stopped sometime during the night, but everything remained dripping wet. Kathleen's clothes were still damp and her body ached in new and creative ways. She took inventory of her condition. The leg was worse. The swelling had increased, and the pain was now a constant grinding presence. Her head still throbbed, though the dizziness had improved slightly. She was desperately thirsty. The sound of running water that had haunted her all night turned out to be coming from a small stream, perhaps 10 feet from where she lay. Kathleen knew she should boil or treat water before drinking it, but she had no means to do so. The risk of giardia or other parasites seemed abstract compared to the immediate need for hydration. She used a stick as a crutch and dragged herself toward the stream, gasping and sometimes crying out as her broken leg scraped against the ground. The journey of 10 feet took nearly 20 minutes. When she finally reached the water, she drank deeply, ignoring the metallic taste and the particles of sediment. It was cold and wonderful. She filled her water bottle and made her way back to the shelter of the overhang. Exhausted by the effort, she ate half of another energy bar and tried to assess her options. Option 1, stay here and wait for rescue. The problem was that rescuers had no way of knowing where she was. They would search the main trails, the tourist routes, the areas where lost hikers typically ended up. This ravine was off the map, accessible only by accident. Option 2, try to climb back up to the trail. She looked at the steep slope she had tumbled down. With a broken leg and probably a concussion, climbing that incline would be nearly impossible. And even if she managed it, she had no idea which direction to go once she reached the trail. Option 3, follow the stream. Water always flows downward, and streams eventually lead to rivers and rivers lead to settlements. It was risky. The terrain along the stream could be dangerous and she might end up moving farther from potential rescue. But staying put was a slow death sentence. Kathleen decided to wait one more day. If no rescue came by the following morning, she would follow the stream and hope it led somewhere inhabited. The second day passed in a blur of pain and anxiety. She heard a helicopter sometime in the afternoon, the distinctive thump of rotor blades echoing off the mountains. She screamed and waved her red rain poncho, but the helicopter passed overhead without slowing, hidden from her by the thick canopy. That night was colder than the first. Kathleen huddled under the overhang, her body shaking violently. She knew she was declining. The combination of injury, exposure, and inadequate food and water was taking its toll. Her thoughts became confused and fragmented. She hallucinated conversations with Jessica, with her parents, with Marco explaining which trail she should have taken. By the morning of the third day, Kathleen knew she couldn't wait any longer. If she stayed, she would die here. Her leg was badly infected. She could see the red streaks of cellulitis spreading up from the break. She had a fever, and her water bottle was nearly empty again. She fashioned a better crutch from a forked branch, padding the top with strips of fabric from her shredded jacket. Then, taking only her backpack with its meager remaining supplies, she began dragging herself along the stream, following it downward. The journey was agony. Every few yards she had to stop and rest, gasping for breath, fighting waves of dizziness and nausea. The terrain was treacherous, slippery rocks, sudden drops, places where the stream cut through narrow channels that forced her to wade through knee-deep water that made her scream as it hit her infected leg. She fell multiple times, each fall a new explosion of pain that left her sobbing on the wet ground. But each time, She forced herself back up. Movement was life. Stopping was death. Hours passed. The stream grew wider as smaller tributaries joined it. Once she startled a family of vizcachas, rabbit-like rodents that bounded away through the rocks. The sight of living creatures gave her irrational hope. Where there were animals, there could be people. By late afternoon of the third day, Kathleen had covered what she estimated to be less than a mile. Her world had shrunk to a narrow focus. The next rock, the next tree to use as support, the next place to rest before the pain became completely overwhelming. The stream had grown into a proper creek now, maybe 15 feet wide, rushing over smooth stones worn by centuries of water flow. She collapsed beside a flat boulder, her makeshift crutch falling from her hands. The fever was worse. She could feel it burning through her body, making her thoughts swim and disconnect. Her infected leg had swollen to nearly twice its normal size, the skin tight and hot to the touch. The red streaks had climbed past her knee. "I'm dying," she thought with strange clarity. This is what dying feels like. She drank the last of her water and lay back on the boulder, staring up at the canopy. Through gaps in the leaves, she could see patches of sky, still gray, still threatening rain. Always rain in this place. How long had it been? 3 days? 4? She had lost track. Her parents would have been notified by now. She imagined her mother crying, her father's face pale with worry as they waited for news in some hotel in Cusco. Jessica would be devastated, probably blaming herself for not stopping Kathleen from wandering off the trail. A sound penetrated her foggy consciousness, something different from the constant rush of water. Voices. Human voices. Kathleen tried to call out, but her throat was so dry and swollen that only a weak rasp emerged. She struggled to sit up, panic giving her a burst of energy. The voices were real, she was sure of it this time, not a hallucination. She grabbed her red poncho and waved it, trying to make noise, any noise that would carry over the sound of the creek. Her hand found a rock, and she banged it against the boulder, the sharp cracks echoing through the ravine. The voices stopped. Then, after a terrifying moment of silence, they came closer, louder. 2 figures emerged from the vegetation downstream. Local men, both wearing rubber boots and carrying machetes, the kind used for clearing trail brush. They spotted her immediately and froze, obviously shocked to find a foreign woman alone and injured in this remote location. "Ayuda!" Kathleen croaked. "Help. Por favor. Ayuda." The men rushed forward, their faces showing concern and confusion. They spoke rapidly in Spanish mixed with Quechua, too fast for Kathleen to follow. But their intentions were clear. One man, older with a weathered face and kind eyes, carefully examined her leg while the younger one pulled out a cell phone. No signal. The older man pointed downstream and said something emphatic. The younger nodded and took off running, disappearing into the forest. The older man stayed with Kathleen. He offered her water from a plastic bottle, which she drank gratefully. He tried to communicate with her in simple Spanish, and she gathered that they were farmers from a village called Santa Teresa, checking animal traps along the creek. The younger man had gone to get help. There was a radio at their village. "Americana?" the man asked. Kathleen nodded. "Yes. American. Lost. 4 días. 4 days." The man's eyes widened. He removed his own jacket and draped it over her shoulders, then built a small fire using dry wood he found under an overhanging rock. The warmth was incredible. Kathleen hadn't realized how dangerously cold she had become until heat started seeping back into her body. She must have passed out because the next thing she knew, more people had arrived. A woman was cleaning the wounds on her face and arms with surprising gentleness. Another man was carefully examining her splinted leg, speaking in low tones to the others. Someone had brought a blanket and she was wrapped in it. Through the fog of fever and exhaustion, Kathleen heard fragments of conversation. The word doctor repeated several times. Helicoptero. Police. The American girl who had been missing. Night fell before they could move her. The group had brought supplies. More blankets, food, bottled water, and basic medical supplies. The woman who introduced herself as Rosa gave Kathleen some kind of herbal tea that tasted bitter but seemed to help with the pain. Rosa's husband, the older man who had first found her, was named Felipe. They kept the fire burning and took turns staying awake, monitoring Kathleen through the night. She drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes waking to find Rosa dabbing her forehead with a cool cloth, sometimes hearing Felipe speaking on a radio with someone about evacuation plans. The next morning brought both good and bad news. The good news: a rescue team was coming. The bad news: the terrain was too difficult for a helicopter extraction. They would have to carry her to a clearing about 2 miles downstream, where the helicopter could land. 4 men arrived with a makeshift stretcher constructed from poles and canvas. Moving Kathleen onto it was excruciating, but she bit down on a folded cloth and endured it. Then began the slow, careful journey downstream. The men rotated positions, working in pairs to carry the stretcher through the difficult terrain. Rosa walked alongside, constantly checking on Kathleen, offering sips of water and words of encouragement in Spanish. Felipe scouted ahead, finding the safest route through the rocks and vegetation. The journey took over 3 hours. Several times they had to stop and find alternate routes when the trail became impassable. Once they had to wade through a section of the creek, where the banks were too steep and overgrown. Kathleen tried not to scream as the cold water hit her infected leg, but she couldn't help crying out. Finally, they emerged into a relatively flat clearing beside the creek, probably an old farming terrace that had been reclaimed by grass. Kathleen could hear the helicopter before she saw it, the rhythmic thump of blades growing louder until the machine appeared over the treetops. The helicopter landed in a whirlwind of grass and spray from the creek. 2 paramedics jumped out along with a police officer. They moved quickly, professional and efficient, transferring Kathleen to their own stretcher, starting an IV, asking questions in English. "Can you tell me your name?" "Kathleen Morrison." "Do you know what day it is?" She had no idea. "No. You've been missing for 4 days. Your family has been very worried. We're going to take you to the hospital in Cusco now, okay?" 4 days. It felt like both longer and shorter than that. As they loaded her into the helicopter, Kathleen grabbed the paramedic's arm. "Wait, those people, Rosa and Felipe and the others, thank them. Tell them thank you. They saved my life." The paramedic nodded and called out to the police officer, who went to speak with the villagers. Kathleen saw Felipe wave at her, his weathered face breaking into a smile. Then the helicopter door closed, and they were lifting off, the clearing falling away below them. Through the window, Kathleen caught a last glimpse of the creek she had followed, the ravine where she had spent 3 nights, the vast green wilderness of the cloud forest that had nearly become her grave. The flight to Cusco took 40 minutes. The paramedics worked on her constantly, checking vital signs, adjusting the IV, communicating with the hospital. One of them, a young man named Carlos, explained that she was severely dehydrated, had a significant infection, probable concussion, and obvious fracture of the left tibia and fibula. "You're very lucky," Carlos said. "Another day, maybe 2, and the sepsis from that infection." He shook his head. "Very lucky those farmers found you." The hospital in Cusco was overwhelming after days in the wilderness. Bright lights, noise, people rushing everywhere. Kathleen was taken directly to the emergency room where a team was waiting. Doctors and nurses surrounded her, cutting away her ruined clothes, asking questions in both English and Spanish, prodding and examining. X-rays confirmed the double fracture in her lower leg. The break was clean but would require surgery to set properly. The head CT scan showed a mild concussion but no brain bleeding. Blood tests revealed severe dehydration, acute kidney injury from the dehydration, and a dangerous bacterial infection. They wheeled her to surgery within 2 hours of her arrival. The last thing Kathleen remembered before the anesthesia took hold was a nurse squeezing her hand and saying, "Your parents are here, they're waiting for you. Everything will be okay now." She woke in a recovery room to the sound of her mother crying. Not the sound of grief, but of overwhelming relief. Her father stood beside the bed, his hand gripping hers so tightly it almost hurt, his face showing every minute of the last 4 days of not knowing whether his daughter was alive or dead. "Baby," her mother managed through tears. "Oh God, Kathleen," we thought. "I'm okay," Kathleen whispered, her throat still raw. "I'm okay, Mom." But she wasn't. Not really. Over the next few days in the hospital, as her body slowly recovered from the physical trauma, the psychological impact began to hit. She would wake in the night with panic attacks, convinced she was still in the ravine, still lost and alone. The sound of rain sent her into trembling fits. She couldn't close her eyes without seeing the moment she fell, feeling that sickening drop into darkness. Jessica came to visit on the second day, her eyes red from crying. "Kath, I'm so sorry. I should have stopped you from going off the trail. I should have noticed sooner that you were gone." "It wasn't your fault," Kathleen said, meaning it. "I made the choice. I wasn't careful enough." Marco came too, visibly shaken. He explained how the search had unfolded. how they had retraced the route multiple times, how police and volunteer search parties had combed the official trails, how helicopters had flown grid patterns over the area. But the ravine where she had fallen was so far off the expected routes, so hidden by vegetation, that they had never searched there. "The locals," Marco said quietly. "They know the mountain better than anyone. They find trails we don't even know exist. They saved you." The police investigation was brief and conclusive. Officer Ramirez, who interviewed Kathleen twice, determined that no crime had occurred. She had simply gotten lost due to taking an unauthorized detour, then injured in an accidental fall during the storm. The case would be closed as an accident with no suspicious circumstances. "You're very fortunate, Miss Morrison," Ramirez said. "Every year tourists disappear in these mountains. Some are never found, some are found too late." The surgery on Kathleen's leg had gone well, but the recovery would be long. The orthopedic surgeon, Dr. Mendoza, explained that she had fractured both her tibia and fibula, a complete break that required metal plates and screws to stabilize. She would need at least 8 weeks in a cast, followed by months of physical therapy. "You're young and healthy," Dr. Mendoza said during his rounds on the 4th day. "The bone will heal, but you must be patient. No walking, no weight-bearing for at least 6 weeks." Kathleen nodded, though the reality of being immobilized terrified her almost as much as being lost had. The enforced stillness gave her too much time to think, to replay every decision that had led to the accident. If she had stayed with the group, if she had been more careful at the trail junction, if she had turned back sooner. Her parents stayed in Cusco for a week, sleeping in shifts in uncomfortable chairs beside her hospital bed. Her father made countless phone calls to their insurance company, to Boston University to arrange for Kathleen's medical leave, to family members back home who wanted updates. Her mother barely left Kathleen's side, as if afraid that looking away might cause her daughter to vanish again. "We can't lose you again," her mother said one night, her voice breaking. "Those 4 days, not knowing. It was the worst thing I've ever experienced." Kathleen squeezed her mother's hand. "I'm here, Mom. I'm not going anywhere." But that wasn't entirely true. The doctors wanted to keep her in Cusco for another 2 weeks to monitor the infection and ensure the surgical site was healing properly. After that, she would be medically cleared to fly home to Boston, where she would continue treatment. The infection was the primary concern. Despite aggressive antibiotic treatment, her leg remained swollen and painful. Dr. Mendoza changed the antibiotic regimen twice, growing increasingly concerned about antibiotic-resistant bacteria she might have contracted from the creek water. On the 6th day, Felipe and Rosa came to visit. They brought a bouquet of wildflowers and a woven bracelet that Rosa tied around Kathleen's wrist with gentle hands. Through a hospital translator, they explained that the bracelet was for protection and healing, blessed by the village elder. "We are so happy you survived," Felipe said through the translator, his weathered face creasing into a smile. "When we found you, we thought maybe you would not make it. You were very sick, very weak." Kathleen felt tears streaming down her face. "You saved my life. I don't know how to thank you properly. You didn't know me, but you helped me anyway." Rosa reached out and cupped Kathleen's face in her calloused hands, speaking directly to her in Spanish. The translator rendered her words. "You are someone's daughter, someone's friend. Of course we help. This is what people do." The simple humanity of that statement broke something open in Kathleen. She sobbed and Rosa held her, this stranger who had become her savior, murmuring comfort in a language Kathleen barely understood, but felt deeply. Before they left, Felipe gave her a small photo, a picture of their village, Santa Teresa, with its cluster of simple houses and the mountains rising behind. "So you remember," he said through the translator. "So you know you have family here now, if you ever come back." Jessica visited every day, bringing books, magazines, and updates about the other students from their group who had continued their travels. Most had cut their trips short and returned home, badly shaken by what had happened to Kathleen. "Everyone feels guilty," Jessica said. "Like we should have noticed sooner that you were gone, or insisted on going back to find you instead of continuing to Machu Picchu. That wouldn't have helped," Kathleen said. "I was already down in that ravine by the time you realized I was missing. And if the search teams with all their equipment couldn't find me, you certainly wouldn't have." But guilt wasn't logical, Kathleen was learning. She felt guilty too, for making her parents suffer, for putting the search teams at risk, for disrupting everyone's trip. Her therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Flores who specialized in trauma, visited twice a week to help her process what had happened. "Survivor's guilt is very common," Doctor, Flores explained during their third session, you feel you should have done something differently, should have been smarter, more careful. But accidents happen, Kathleen. You made a mistake, yes, but you didn't deserve what happened to you. And you survived because you were resourceful and determined. That's what you should focus on. Easier said than done. The nightmares continued. In them, Kathleen was always falling or lost, or dying of thirst while hearing voices calling her name just out of reach. She would wake gasping, disoriented, sometimes unsure if she was in the hospital or still in the ravine. The panic attacks were worse. Sudden and unpredictable, they would hit her without warning. Her heart racing, her breath coming in short gasps, convinced that she was in mortal danger even though she was safe in a hospital bed. The nurses taught her breathing techniques, and Dr. Flores worked with her on grounding exercises, but the attacks continued. On the 10th day, Officer Ramirez returned with a formal report for her to review and sign. It detailed the timeline of her disappearance, the search efforts, and the circumstances of her rescue. Reading it was surreal, seeing her ordeal reduced to bureaucratic language, clinical and distant. The case is officially closed, Ramirez said. We've determined that this was an unfortunate accident with no criminal involvement. However, we will be using your case as an example in our tourist safety briefings. You are not the first person to get lost on these trails, and sadly, you won't be the last. He paused, then added more gently, but you are one of the lucky ones who survived. Perhaps you can help others learn from your experience. That comment stayed with Kathleen long after Ramirez left. Could something positive come from this nightmare? Could her story actually help prevent other tragedies? 2 weeks after her rescue, the doctors finally cleared her for travel. Her parents had already booked flights back to Boston, where Kathleen would continue her recovery and rehabilitation. The night before they left, Marco came to say goodbye. I have been a guide for 15 years, he said, sitting in the uncomfortable hospital chair. I have taken thousands of tourists into these mountains. This is the first time someone got lost like this. I keep thinking about what I could have done differently. You couldn't have known I would wander off, Kathleen said. I made that choice. I knew the rules, and I broke them anyway. Yes, but maybe I should have been more clear about the dangers. Maybe I should have made the group stay closer together. He shook his head. I have changed how I guide now. Smaller groups, more frequent head counts. No one goes anywhere alone, even for a minute. After he left, Kathleen thought about responsibility and blame, about how a single moment of carelessness could cascade into disaster. She thought about all the small decisions that had combined to put her in that ravine, choosing the ascending trail, continuing when she should have turned back, not having better emergency equipment. But she also thought about the decisions that had saved her, fashioning the splint, finding the stream, following it downstream instead of waiting to die, and the incredible luck of Felipe and Rosa being in exactly the right place at the right time. The flight home was difficult. Kathleen's leg was in a heavy cast, and even with the extra legroom seat her father had purchased, the position was uncomfortable. The painkillers made her drowsy but didn't completely eliminate the throbbing ache, and every time the plane hit turbulence, she felt panic rising in her throat, her body remembering the sensation of falling. Her mother held her hand the entire flight. Boston in late February was cold and gray, so different from the lush green of the Peruvian mountains. Kathleen's younger brother, Michael, picked them up at the airport. He hugged her carefully, his eyes bright with unshed tears. You scared the hell out of us, Kath, he said. Don't ever do that again. Trust me, I don't plan to. The first few weeks back home were an adjustment. Her parents' house felt simultaneously too small and too large. Her childhood bedroom felt foreign, full of artifacts from a version of herself that no longer existed. She was the same person who had left for Peru 6 weeks ago, but also fundamentally changed. She couldn't climb the stairs to her bedroom for the first 2 weeks, so her parents converted the downstairs study into a temporary bedroom. Friends from university came to visit, bringing flowers and get-well cards, but Kathleen found their cheerfulness exhausting. They wanted to hear the story, the dramatic rescue, the survival against the odds, but they didn't want to hear about the fear, the pain, the darkness of those nights alone in the ravine. Only Jessica seemed to understand. She stayed in Boston for a few days before heading back to campus, and they spent hours talking about what had happened. Really talking, not the sanitized version Kathleen told everyone else. I have nightmares about it too, Jessica admitted one night. About losing you. About standing at that viewpoint and realizing you weren't there, and knowing something was terribly wrong but not knowing what to do about it. You did everything right, Kathleen assured her. You told Marco immediately. You helped coordinate the search. None of this was your fault. And none of it was your fault either, Jessica said firmly. You made a mistake. Everyone makes mistakes. You just had really, really bad luck with the consequences. Physical therapy started 3 weeks after Kathleen returned home. The therapist, a no-nonsense woman named Sandra, explained that the break had been severe and that full recovery would take 6 months to a year, maybe longer. You're young, which is good, Sandra said during the initial evaluation. But you also spent 4 days with an untreated break and a serious infection. That complicates things. We'll start slowly and build up gradually. Slowly proved to be an understatement. The first sessions focused just on reducing swelling and maintaining flexibility in her ankle and knee. Even these gentle movements hurt. Kathleen gritted her teeth and endured it, but the progress felt agonizingly slow. The psychological recovery was even slower. Dr. Chen, the therapist her parents found in Boston, specialized in trauma and PTSD. During their first session, she explained that what Kathleen had experienced was a classic traumatic event. Her life had been in genuine danger. She had been helpless and alone, and the experience had fundamentally challenged her sense of safety in the world. Recovery isn't linear, Dr. Chen said. You'll have good days and bad days. Sometimes you'll think you're past it, and then something will trigger a memory and you'll feel like you're back in that ravine. That's normal. That's how trauma works. Kathleen threw herself into therapy with the same determination she had used to survive in the mountains. She did the exercises Dr. Chen assigned, keeping a journal, practicing mindfulness, gradually exposing herself to triggers like the sound of rain or images of mountains. But some things remained difficult. She couldn't watch nature documentaries without feeling panic. She couldn't be in small enclosed spaces. The smell of wet earth made her nauseous. And she couldn't talk about archaeology without feeling a deep sense of loss for the passion that had led her into danger. I'm thinking about changing my major, she told her parents 6 weeks after returning home. They were having dinner, Kathleen at the table in her wheelchair, her casted leg propped on a cushioned stool. Her father set down his fork. Kathleen, you don't have to make that decision now. You're still recovering. Give yourself time. I don't think time will change how I feel, she said quietly. Every time I think about archaeology, I think about that trail, about getting lost, about almost dying because I was so focused on documenting some old building that I didn't pay attention to basic safety. Her mother reached across the table and took her hand. What happened to you was terrible, honey, but it doesn't mean you have to give up something you love. Maybe I didn't love it as much as I thought I did, Kathleen said. Or maybe I loved it for the wrong reasons. Spring arrived in Boston with its usual unpredictable temperament. Warm sunshine one day, freezing rain the next. Kathleen's cast came off in mid-April, 8 weeks after the surgery. The reveal was both exciting and devastating. Her left leg had atrophied significantly, the calf muscle noticeably smaller than her right leg. The surgical scars were angry red lines across her shin, and the leg itself looked pale and vulnerable without the protective shell of plaster. This is normal, Sandra assured her during their session that day. Muscle atrophy happens with immobilization. We'll build it back up. But I want you to understand, this will hurt. Rebuilding muscle always does. She wasn't exaggerating. The physical therapy intensified dramatically once the cast was removed. Weight-bearing exercises, resistance training, balance work, all of it was excruciating. Kathleen would leave each session drenched in sweat, sometimes fighting back tears from the pain. But she pushed through it. The same stubborn determination that had kept her crawling along that stream now drove her through rehabilitation. She did her exercises religiously, even when her legs screamed in protest. She tracked her progress meticulously. How many steps she could take without the crutch, how much weight she could bear, how long she could stand before the pain became unbearable. By May, she was walking with a pronounced limp but without assistive devices. By June, the limp had improved significantly. Sandra was pleased with her progress, though she cautioned that full recovery would take several more months. You're doing great, Kathleen, Sandra said during a session in early June. Better than I expected, honestly. But don't push too hard. Listen to your body. If it hurts, rest. The psychological healing proved more complicated. Dr. Chen continued their weekly sessions, working through the layers of trauma, anxiety, and changed identity that Kathleen struggled with. In late May, they began EMDR therapy, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. a technique designed to help process traumatic memories. During these sessions, Kathleen would recall specific moments from her ordeal, while following Dr. Chen's moving finger with her eyes. The process was exhausting and emotionally draining, but gradually, the memories lost some of their visceral power. She could think about the ravine without immediately feeling her heart race. She could hear rain without spiraling into panic, but the question of her future remained unresolved. Boston University had granted her a medical leave for the spring semester, but she needed to decide about returning in the fall. Her advisor, Professor Whitmore, had been understanding but had encouraged her to consider whether archaeology was still the right path. "There's no shame in changing direction," he had told her during a phone call in April. "What you experienced would shake anyone. If you need to step away from archaeology, that's perfectly valid." But stepping away felt like letting the accident define her, like allowing fear to dictate her choices. Kathleen struggled with this tension, between honoring her trauma and not being imprisoned by it. The answer came unexpectedly in late June. Kathleen was having coffee with Jessica, who was home for the summer, when her friend mentioned an article she had read about tourist safety in national parks. "It made me think of you," Jessica said, "about how you survived because you knew basic first aid and had the right mindset." The article was saying that most people who die in wilderness accidents could have survived if they had better preparation and training. Something clicked in Kathleen's mind. "Send me that article." She read it that evening, then searched for more information. What she discovered was both alarming and illuminating. Every year, hundreds of tourists went missing or died in remote locations around the world. Many of these tragedies were preventable, the result of inadequate preparation, poor decision-making, or simple bad luck combined with lack of knowledge. But there were also success stories. People who survived against impossible odds because they had the right training, the right equipment, or simply the right mindset. People like her. Over the next few days, an idea began to form. What if she could use her experience to help others? Not by abandoning archaeology, but by transforming her relationship to it. By becoming an advocate for safety and preparedness. She called Professor Whitmore and asked if they could meet in person. When they sat down in his cluttered office at the university in early July, Kathleen outlined her idea. "I want to come back in the fall," she said, "but I want to shift my focus. Instead of pure archaeology, I want to combine it with wilderness safety, risk management, and education. I want to develop programs to help prepare researchers and tourists for working in remote locations." Professor Whitmore leaned back in his chair, considering. "That's an interesting approach. We don't really have anyone in the department working on that intersection of archaeology and safety training." "Exactly. But we should. How many archaeological sites are in remote, potentially dangerous locations? How many students go on field schools without adequate preparation for the physical and mental challenges they'll face?" They talked for over an hour, exploring the possibilities. By the time Kathleen left his office, she had a plan. She would complete her archaeology degree, but her senior thesis would focus on developing safety protocols for archaeological fieldwork in remote locations. She would get certified in wilderness first aid and possibly become an instructor. And she would share her story, not just the dramatic rescue, but the honest, difficult reality of survival and recovery. The next step was talking to her parents. She had dinner with them that evening and laid out her plans. Her mother's face showed concern. "Honey, are you sure? Going back to that field after everything that happened?" "That's exactly why I need to go back, Mom. If I avoid archaeology forever, then the accident wins. It defines me. But if I can take what I learned and use it to help others, then something good comes from it." Her father was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I think I understand. You're not running from what happened, you're running towards something meaningful because of what happened." "Exactly." In August, Kathleen enrolled in a Wilderness First Responder certification course. The intensive 9-day program covered emergency medical care in remote settings. Exactly the kind of training that might have helped her in Peru. Learning proper splinting techniques, wound care, and recognition of serious conditions like the sepsis she had developed was both therapeutic and empowering. During one of the practical exercises, she had to demonstrate how to stabilize a leg fracture. As she worked through the steps with a volunteer patient, her hands trembled slightly, remembering the pain and fear of splinting her own broken leg in that ravine. But she completed the exercise successfully. The instructor, a weathered mountain guide named Tom, pulled her aside afterward. "You okay? I noticed you seemed pretty affected by that scenario." Kathleen hesitated, then decided honesty was the right approach. I actually broke my leg in a hiking accident in Peru earlier this year. Had to splint it myself. This is part of my recovery process. Learning to do it properly. Learning what I should have known. Tom's expression shifted to one of respect. That takes guts coming back to face it like this. Most people would avoid anything that reminded them of a trauma like that. Avoiding it doesn't help, Kathleen said. Trust me, I tried. She passed the certification course with high marks. More importantly, she felt a shift inside herself. The knowledge and skills she now possessed felt like armor against future fears. She couldn't control everything, couldn't prevent all accidents, but she could be prepared. She could help others be prepared. In September, Kathleen returned to Boston University for the fall semester. Walking across campus with her backpack, her legs still occasionally aching but functional, she felt both nervous and determined. Several professors and students recognized her from news coverage of her disappearance and rescue. Some approached her with questions or expressions of support. Others stared from a distance, clearly curious but uncertain how to engage. Her first class was archaeological field methods. When the professor, Dr. Martinez, discussed safety protocols for field work, several students glanced at Kathleen. She met their eyes steadily, not ashamed, but not seeking attention either. After class, Dr. Martinez asked to speak with her. Professor Whitmore told me about your idea for your thesis project. I think it's excellent. I'd like to be on your committee if you'll have me. I'd be honored, Kathleen said. I also think we need to revamp our safety training for field schools. Would you be interested in helping develop new protocols? Maybe even leading some training sessions? This was more than Kathleen had hoped for. Yes, absolutely yes. Over the fall semester, she threw herself into the work. Her thesis took shape, a comprehensive guide to risk assessment and safety protocols for archaeological research in remote locations. She interviewed safety experts, reviewed case studies of fieldwork accidents, and drew extensively on her own experience. But she also interviewed the people who had saved her. Through email and eventually video calls, she reconnected with Felipe and Rosa in Santa Teresa. With the help of a translator, they shared their perspective on the rescue, how they had been checking animal traps when they heard the sound of rock on rock, how they had almost walked past her, how close she had come to dying alone in that ravine. Why did you help me? Kathleen asked during one call. You didn't know me. You could have just reported my location and let the authorities handle it. Felipe's answer through the translator was simple. You needed help. We could help. This is what we do. Rosa added something else, a longer statement that the translator rendered carefully. In the mountains we are all vulnerable. The weather, the land, the distance from help. These things do not care if you are rich or poor, local or foreign. When someone needs help, we help. Because someday we might be the ones who need help. Their simple humanity, their automatic compassion for a stranger moved Kathleen deeply. She included their story in her thesis, highlighting how indigenous knowledge and community networks had succeeded where professional search teams had failed. In October, she gave her first public presentation about her experience. The university's Adventure Club had invited her to speak about wilderness safety. Standing in front of 50 students, Kathleen felt her hands shake as she began. 6 months ago, I made a mistake, she started. Actually, I made several mistakes, and those mistakes nearly killed me. She told the story honestly, not the heroic survival narrative that media coverage had suggested, but the real story of fear, pain, poor decisions, and incredible luck. She showed pictures of the ravine where she had fallen, of her injuries, of the people who had saved her. I'm not here to scare you away from outdoor adventure or archaeological fieldwork, she concluded. I'm here to tell you that preparation matters, knowledge matters, humility matters, respect for the environment and the people who know it better than you matters. I survived partly because of my own determination, but mostly because I was lucky enough to be found by people who knew what to do and cared enough to do it. The questions afterward were thoughtful and engaged. Several students approached her afterward, thanking her for her honesty, asking for more resources on wilderness safety training. One young woman, probably a freshman, waited until the others had left. I'm supposed to go on an archaeology field school in Guatemala next summer, she said quietly. After hearing your story, I'm scared. Should I not go? Kathleen thought carefully before answering. Fear is information. It tells you to be careful, to prepare, to respect the risks. But fear shouldn't stop you from doing meaningful things. Go on your field school, but prepare properly. Get training. Listen to your guides. Don't take unnecessary risks. And know that even if you do everything right, Accidents can still happen, but you'll be much better equipped to handle them." The young woman nodded, looking relieved. "Thank you. That helps." By November 2002, almost 9 months after her accident, Kathleen's life had found a new rhythm. Her leg had healed remarkably well. The limp was barely noticeable now, appearing only when she was tired or had been walking for several hours. The scars remained, pink lines running along her shin that she no longer tried to hide. They were part of her story, proof that she had survived something terrible and come out stronger. Her thesis was taking final shape, a comprehensive document that combined archaeological methodology with wilderness safety protocols, risk assessment frameworks, and case studies of fieldwork accidents. Professor Whitmore had been impressed enough to submit a condensed version to the Journal of Field Archaeology, and the editors had expressed interest in publishing it. But the work that meant the most to Kathleen was the direct impact she was having on students and travelers. After her presentation to the Adventure Club, word had spread. She was invited to speak at other universities, at hiking clubs, at travel organizations. Each time she told her story, not to glorify herself, but to educate, to warn, to prepare. She had also been working with the Peruvian Tourism Board, consulting on new safety protocols for trails around Machu Picchu and other popular archaeological sites. The recommendations included mandatory check-ins at certain points, improved trail marking, better communication systems for guides, and enhanced search and rescue capabilities. The work was deeply satisfying, turning her trauma into tangible improvements that might prevent future tragedies. In December, Kathleen received an unexpected email. It was from a woman named Patricia Caldwell, whose 23-year-old daughter, Emma, had disappeared while hiking in Costa Rica 3 years earlier. Emma had never been found. "Dear Kathleen," the email read, "I read about your experience and your survival, and I wanted to reach out. My daughter Emma went missing in 2000 and we never found her. She was experienced, careful, well prepared, but the jungle is unforgiving and one mistake, one moment of bad luck, can be fatal. I'm writing because I want to thank you for the work you're doing. Every person who learns from your experience, who prepares better because of your story, is someone else's daughter or son who might make it home. Please keep doing what you're doing. It matters more than you know." Kathleen sat at her desk reading and rereading the email, tears streaming down her face. She had known intellectually that her work was important, but this personal message brought the reality home. For every person like her who survived, there were others like Emma who didn't, and families like Patricia's, living with endless not knowing, with hope that slowly calcified into grief. She replied immediately, thanking Patricia for reaching out and asking if she could share Emma's story in her presentations, with permission, with respect, as a reminder of what was at stake. Patricia agreed, sending photos of her daughter, a bright-eyed young woman with a backpack and hiking boots, grinning at the camera with a waterfall behind her. From then on, Kathleen began each presentation with Emma's picture. "This is Emma Caldwell," she would say. "She disappeared while hiking in Costa Rica in 2000. She was experienced, prepared, and careful. She's still missing. I show you her picture because I want you to understand. I was lucky, incredibly lucky. Not everyone is, and that's why this matters." In January 2003, Kathleen defended her thesis. The examination committee consisted of Professor Whitmore, Dr. Martinez, a wilderness medicine expert from Harvard Medical School, and a representative from the National Park Service. The defense lasted 2 hours, with detailed questions about her methodology, her recommendations, and the practical implementation of her proposed protocols. When it was over, Professor Whitmore shook her hand with a broad smile. "Congratulations, Kathleen. That was one of the strongest defenses I've seen. And more importantly, I think this work will actually save lives." The thesis received highest honors. More significantly, Boston University announced it would be implementing Kathleen's recommended safety protocols for all field schools and archaeological expeditions. Other universities contacted her, asking for copies of her work to inform their own policies. But Kathleen's biggest project was still ahead. In February 2003, exactly 1 year after her accident, she returned to Peru. The decision hadn't been easy. Her parents had been anxious. Dr. Chen had urged careful consideration, and part of Kathleen herself was terrified at the prospect. But she needed to do this, to face the place that had nearly killed her, to thank the people who had saved her in person, and to close a chapter before moving forward. Jessica came with her, as did a documentary filmmaker named Marcus Chen, who wanted to capture Kathleen's return for a short film about wilderness safety and survival. The film would be used in tourism and adventure education programs. They flew into Cusco on a clear morning, the Andes rising majestically around the city. Kathleen felt her chest tighten as the plane descended, memories flooding back. The emergency flight to the same hospital, the pain, the fear, but she breathed through it, using the techniques Dr. Chen had taught her. The first stop was the hospital where she had been treated. Dr. Mendoza met them there, pleased to see how well she had recovered. They toured the facility, and Kathleen met some of the nurses and doctors who had cared for her. "You are a medical success story," Dr. Mendoza said, examining her leg. "The healing is excellent. You worked hard in physical therapy, yes?" "Very hard," Kathleen confirmed. "I had good motivation." The next day they traveled to Aguascalientes. The small town looked exactly as Kathleen remembered. The same hostels and restaurants, the same tourist crowds preparing for their ascent to Machu Picchu. But seeing it now, with the perspective of time and recovery, felt surreal. Marco met them at their hostel. He looked older, more serious than Kathleen remembered. When he saw her walking without a limp, genuine relief flooded his face. "Kathleen," he said, embracing her carefully, "I am so glad to see you well. I have thought about you many times this year, wondered how you were doing." "I'm good, Marco. Really good. And I want to thank you for everything you did, organizing the search, supporting my parents, testifying for the investigation. It was the worst experience of my guiding career," he admitted. "I changed everything after that. I now require all my groups to stay together at all times, no exceptions. And I carry better emergency equipment, satellite phone, first aid supplies, GPS tracker." "That's exactly what I hoped would happen," Kathleen said, "that something good could come from what happened to me." The most emotional reunion came 2 days later when they traveled to Santa Teresa to meet Felipe and Rosa. The village was small and remote, accessible only by a rough road that wound through spectacular mountain scenery. When their vehicle pulled into the village center, Felipe and Rosa were waiting, along with what appeared to be half the village population. The moment Kathleen stepped out of the van, Rosa rushed forward and wrapped her in a fierce embrace, speaking rapid Spanish through tears. Felipe waited his turn, then hugged her as well, his weathered face creased with joy. Through their translator, Rosa said, "We have prayed for you every day. We lit candles at the church, asked God to heal you and keep you safe. And here you are walking, smiling, alive. Because of you," Kathleen said, her own tears flowing freely. "You saved my life. I came back to say thank you properly because I was too sick to do it then." The village had prepared a celebration. Simple food, music, and an overwhelming outpouring of warmth and hospitality. Children crowded around Kathleen, curious about this American woman their parents had rescued. Elderly villagers approached to touch her hand, to confirm she was real and whole. Felipe walked her to the spot where they had first found her, about a mile from the village along the creek. Kathleen stood there, looking at the place where she had lain on that boulder, certain she was dying. The creek still rushed past. The vegetation still hung thick and green, but the terror was gone. In its place was gratitude, profound, overwhelming gratitude. "I want to do something for your village," Kathleen said through the translator, "to thank you properly. What does Santa Teresa need?" Felipe and Rosa discussed with the other villagers. Finally, Rosa explained through the translator, "We need medical supplies. The clinic here has very little. When people get sick or injured, we must travel many hours to reach a doctor. If we had better supplies, we could help people sooner." Kathleen had anticipated something like this. Before leaving Boston, she had set up a fundraising campaign through her university, raising money to give back to the community that had saved her. The response had been overwhelming. Over $15,000 donated by people who had been moved by her story. "I've brought money for medical supplies," Kathleen said, "and I'll make sure you continue to receive support. It's not enough, it can never be enough, but it's a start." The documentary filmmaker Marcus captured it all. The emotional reunions, the village celebration, Kathleen standing at the spot where she had nearly died. But the most powerful footage came when Kathleen agreed to return to the ravine where she had fallen. Marco led them there, following a route he had mapped out after the accident. The trek took over an hour, climbing through cloud forest along narrow trails that made Kathleen's heart race with remembered fear. But she pushed through, needing to face this final demon. When they reached the viewpoint where she had originally left the group to photograph the stone structure, Kathleen stood at the exact spot where her ordeal had begun. The structure was still there, half hidden by vegetation, looking innocent and fascinating in the afternoon light. "This is where I made the choice," she said to the camera, "where I decided that 5 minutes of photographs was worth leaving the group. I look at it now, and I can't believe I thought it was such a good idea, but I understand why I did it. I was excited, focused on my research, confident in my abilities. I didn't think anything bad would happen. They didn't attempt to descend into the ravine itself. The terrain was too dangerous, and Kathleen had no desire to relive that particular experience. Standing at the top, looking down into the green abyss where she had fallen, was enough. I spent 4 days down there," she said quietly. 4 days thinking I might die, and I learned something important, that life is fragile, that we're not as in control as we think we are, that we depend on the kindness of strangers more than we want to admit. But I also learned that people are good, that most humans, when they find someone in trouble, will help. Felipe and Rosa didn't have to help me, they chose to. And that choice made all the difference. On their last day in Peru, Kathleen visited Machu Picchu itself, the destination she had been trying to reach when everything went wrong. Walking through the ancient citadel, surrounded by precisely fitted stones and the ghosts of Inca civilization, she felt a complex mix of emotions. Wonder at the archaeological achievement, sadness for what her accident had cost her, but also a sense of completion, of having faced her fears and emerged intact. Standing at the highest point of the ruins, looking out over the mountains that had nearly become her grave, Kathleen felt something shift inside her. The trauma wasn't gone. It would probably never be completely gone, but it no longer defined her. She was Kathleen Morrison, archaeologist, survivor, advocate for safety and preparation. She was someone who had made mistakes and paid dearly for them, but who had transformed that pain into purpose. When they returned to Boston in late February, Kathleen had one final milestone to complete. She had been invited to speak at a national conference on adventure travel and tourism safety, presenting the keynote address to an audience of industry professionals, government officials, and safety experts. Standing on that stage in front of 500 people, Kathleen began with the now familiar words, "In February 2002, I made a series of mistakes that nearly killed me." She told her story once more, but this time with a year of healing and perspective behind it. She presented her research, her recommendations, the changes that had already been implemented in Peru and at multiple universities. She showed footage from the documentary, including the emotional reunion with Felipe and Rosa. Survival, she concluded, is never just about one person's strength or determination. It's about preparation, yes, about knowledge and skill, but it's also about community, about the networks of care that exist even in the most remote places. I survived because Felipe and Rosa chose to help me, because doctors and nurses cared for me, because my family never gave up hope, because friends and strangers supported my recovery. We survive together or we don't survive at all. And that's why this work matters. Every protocol we implement, every person we train, every story we share, these create that network of care. They turn tragedy into prevention, pain into wisdom, survival into advocacy. I was lucky. Others might not be. But if we do this work, if we prepare, educate, and care for each other, we can create a world where fewer people need luck to survive. The standing ovation lasted several minutes. Afterward, dozens of people approached her, some with their own survival stories, some with questions about implementing her protocols, some simply to say thank you for her honesty and courage. Later that evening, sitting alone in her hotel room, Kathleen opened her laptop and wrote an email to Patricia Caldwell, Emma's mother. "Dear Patricia," she wrote, "today I gave the keynote address at a major safety conference. I showed Emma's picture and told her story. Over 500 people saw it, and many came up afterward to say they would remember her, that she would influence the work they do to keep travelers safe. I thought you would want to know that your daughter's life and the tragedy of her loss is making a difference. She matters. She will always matter." Patricia's reply came the next morning. "Thank you, Kathleen. You've given Emma's life meaning that her death couldn't take away. Keep doing this important work. You're saving lives in her name, in the names of all those who weren't as lucky as you. That's the best tribute anyone could give." Kathleen closed her laptop and looked out the window at the Boston skyline. The sun was rising, painting the buildings in shades of gold and pink. A new day, a new beginning. She had survived. And now she would help others survive too. That was her purpose, that was her gift, and that was enough.